Welcome to Research 101, a how-to introduction to research presented by the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art Archives, presentation by Chris Bonadio, Assistant Librarian, and narrated by Susan O'Shea, Archival Collections Specialist. Our goal today is for you to be able to find, identify, and use primary and secondary sources to conduct basic historical research. For this presentation, we are going to keep our topic broad. We will focus on John Ringling as an art connoisseur versus John Ringling as a businessman or as an early 20th century American socialite. Specific questions that could be addressed during our research include: why did John Ringling collect art? Did John Ringling prefer one art style or movement over others? Why? What selection criteria did Mr. Ringling use to add new objects to his collection? And what resources were available to help him choose? There is no one right way to conduct research. However, patterns or models of information-seeking behavior do exist. A beginning researcher can use these patterns or models as a template for their own research endeavors. Keeping in mind each of these models only shows one way of depicting information-seeking behavior. The next slide describes one model. One model that is often cited in library and information science is Colthall's Information Search Process, ISP. This model identifies the challenging steps that researchers can encounter during their search for information. Colthall's model consists of the following stages. Stage 1, task initiation. Knowing a research process must be started to finish a project. During this early stage, the researcher may experience some trepidation and uncertainty, or even anxiety, because they don't have knowledge yet on their topic. In the next stage, selection, the researcher chooses a topic, a problem to investigate, or questions to find answers to based on various factors, like personal interests and time requirements. The researcher is more optimistic about completing the project at this point. These first two stages include looking for background information on the new topic, which can mitigate feelings of uncertainty. Stage 3 is exploration. This stage is characterized by more information seeking to focus or hone the chosen topic. Simultaneously, one may have feelings of frustration, doubt, or disappointment as new information accumulates that may conflict with the researcher's previous assumptions, ultimately causing one to feel a little defeated. But in stage 4, formulation, this is considered the turning point in the research process, when the topic becomes clearer and more focused, providing the user with more confidence. The fifth stage is the collection stage, which involves choosing the most relevant information that supports the chosen topic. Any uncertainty in the topic is lifted at this point, giving way to a deepening interest in the project. The final stage is the presentation. At this point, the user feels relief as the research process comes to an end, hopefully with the desired outcomes, where one can successfully apply the research and share the results with others. As you can see, much of the model involves gathering information. Many research tools exist for gathering background information, which we will discuss later in this presentation. Secondary sources are a good place to get background information early on. So let's take a closer look at those. What are secondary sources? These are sources of information that researchers not directly involved in the event under investigation have written about the subject. They can also be based on primary sources and/or other secondary sources. In other words, these are sources created later by someone who did not experience the event firsthand or participate in the events or conditions under investigation by the researcher. This can include later authors' interpretation or summaries of primary sources, and we'll discuss primary sources in a bit. Some leading examples of secondary sources include course textbooks, encyclopedias, dictionaries, and biographies. Secondary sources can help you gain a better understanding on your topic in multiple ways, which include providing background information on your subject, adding context to your research question, offering different perspectives and opinions on the same event or individuals that you're looking into. And they're also a time saver, since many secondary sources can be easier to read and understand than primary sources tend to be. You can start looking for secondary sources at the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art Archives and Library, or any library or archives that meet your information needs, depending on your subject of interest. Before we go further, I'm going to quickly provide definitions for libraries and archives so you can better understand their role in the research process and how they are similar and different. From the Librarian's Book of Lists, a library is a collection of resources in a variety of formats that is organized by information professionals or other experts who provide convenient physical, digital, bibliographic, or intellectual access and offer targeted services and programs with the mission of educating, informing, or entertaining a variety of audiences, and the goal of stimulating individual learning and advancing society as a whole. This definition on archives comes from the Society of American Archivists. Archives are materials created or received by a person, family, or organization, public or private, in the conduct of their affairs and preserved because of the enduring value contained in the information they contain, or as evidence of the functions and responsibilities of their creator, especially those materials maintained using the principles of provenance, original order, and collective control, permanent records. These institutions are not mutually exclusive. As a researcher, you will use resources from both of them. In fact, at the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art, the archives and library frequently collaborate to make research successful and richer for our users. Our users include those within the Ringling institution and also users from all over the world who are researching a variety of topics. So where are some places you can look to locate research material? You can ask a librarian. Librarians are happy to assist with research requests and typically can be reached through online chat, email, telephone, or in person, depending on the institution. Subject LibGuides, like the one on John Ringling the Art Collector, are a great tool to help researchers find books, articles, and other resources for information on your subject. This LibGuide is on John Ringling's legacy and his passion for collecting grand works of art. Other resources include FSU, the Ringling Museum of Art Library online catalog, article databases, and Library of Congress, LC subject headings, and name authority. You can also consult an archivist. At the Ringling, you can submit an archives inquiry form, which puts you in contact with our archives team. Additional resources include Archives Grid, which is a collection of over 4 million archival material descriptions, including MARC records from WorldCat and finding aids harvested from the web. Archives Finder, which is a subscription-based service offered through FSU. Archives Finder is a current directory which describes over 220,000 collections of primary source material housed in thousands of repositories across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. You can also talk to colleagues, friends, and fellow researchers too. Now that we know what secondary sources are, let's look at primary sources. Primary sources hold the words of the witnesses or first recorders of an event. Secondary sources may be produced by using a number of primary sources. They represent information that lies closest to an event, with some exceptions, such as oral histories. They include testimony of an eyewitness and observations made by other senses or with some mechanical device, such as a camera. Some examples of primary sources include memoirs, autobiographies, which may be written after the event by someone in the event, oral histories, which may be recorded after the event, letters and diaries, John Ringling's art and book auction catalogs, papers of John Ringling, political cartoons, laws, deeds, charters, and archaeological artifacts. Not all primary sources are published or are in copyright. The Ringling Archives has many unpublished primary sources in our holdings. Remember that LibGuide we discussed earlier? Well, that LibGuide also included archival material from the Ringling Archives. These are some examples of primary resources that Jessica Gavitt found when she created her LibGuide during her 2019 summer internship with the Ringling Art Library. From Correspondence Box 1, the General Correspondence series contains many letters to and from John Ringling with contents pertaining to art dealings, whether discussing matters of shipment and delivery or regarding the sale of specific pieces or entire collections. This series of correspondence is undoubtedly valuable to understanding Ringling as a collector. Several folders contain letters from various galleries or personal collectors offering Ringling the sale of specific works or collections. A 1927 letter from Julius Buhler to John Ringling is quite interesting for its content. Buhler discusses the sale of the Benson collection, which included a Venerese and a Palmer Vecchio, and the sale of the Holfer collection. He also mentions going to Munich to order the frames for the Rubens paintings in Ringling's collection. The letter illuminates the affectionate relationship Buhler had with John Ringling. Other notable correspondence are a letter from Buhler to John H. Phillips and letters to John Ringling from other collectors of art and dealers such as W. F. Stokes, Mrs. E. J. Trotter, Albert Keller, Arthur Fisher, French and Company, Inc., Max Rothschilds, Ltd. London, and J.P. Morgan, just to name a few. So why is it important to use primary sources? These resources provide a solid base for your conclusions, not influenced by the interpretations of other authors that can come from secondary sources. And they help ensure the integrity of your research, since information found in primary sources is not filtered through someone else's view, other than the original creator's views. Some caveats. All humans have biases, so both sources can be biased or have a slant, and it is important to be able to recognize that and identify them as you conduct your research. For example, government leaders who know their work will be studied by future historians and students can play to posterity to inflate their images. Others could leave information out that makes them look bad. On the other hand, not all inconsistencies are intentional or suggest an ulterior motive. Historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. said, "The generic title for all memoirs should be Things I Remember and Things I Think I Remember." You should always critically evaluate both primary and secondary sources. Read multiple primary and secondary sources, and feel comfortable forming your own opinions about them. Primary and secondary sources are not always easily distinguishable. For example, even secondary sources can sometimes function as primary sources. One good example of this is found in the book Eminent Victorians, which was written in 1918 by Lytton Strachey. This may be read to help understand the history of mid to late 19th century England. As a history of English culture and society, Eminent Victorians is a secondary source based on the author's analysis of primary sources, which he would have used to write the book. On the other hand, a present-day scholar could use this book to analyze the mores and attitudes of the author and early 20th century English scholars, in which case, Eminent Victorians is being used as a primary source. How do you know if something is a primary or secondary source? Here are some questions you can ask yourself to help determine whether it is a primary or secondary source. Who created the item or source? Was it an eyewitness account or written by a historian many years after the event? When was the item originally created? If published, when was it published? Why was it created? Is it a reference work for a general audience? Is it aimed at a particular group of people? How and for what purpose is the current researcher, you, the student, going to use the item or source relative to the research topic? We hope this presentation has expanded your research capabilities and sparked your interest in discovery. Please feel free to reach out to the Ringling Library or the Ringling Archive with any questions. Thank you.